Much of what we learn about science, nature, and the environment happens outside of school and beyond the walls of museums, zoos, and nature centers. I have worked as an independent environmental professional for many years and know there are others like me who interact with the public in communities worldwide. On the Talaterra podcast, we discover who these professionals are, what they do, and how they create change. Why do I focus on independent professionals? I focus on them because they move freely through communities. They move freely between schools, organizations, businesses, programs, and other informal learning environments. They are positioned to meet the public where they are, and this is powerful. Thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Tania Marien. Hello. Today my guest is Rob Law. Rob is a musician and composer with decades of experience in the music industry. Rob is also a podcaster, a storyteller, and an advocate for outdoor learning. In this episode, Rob and I talk about his podcast for children. The Creek Kids is a podcast that was inspired by the plays transmitted through the radio many decades ago. During the golden age of radio, it was common to hear stories like this.
It's late summer 1942. On a country road in Wisconsin, two small children, wide-eyed with amazement, stare...
Rob's radio-style podcast doesn't have quite that same old-timey feel. Rob's podcast features children, adults, and animal characters. It takes kids on outdoor adventures and introduces them to natural history and ecological concepts. Why did Rob begin his podcast? And how does he plan the intricate layers of each episode? Let's find out. Well, Rob, thank you so much for stopping by today, for reaching out and introducing me to the Creek Kids and to Campbell Creek and the sound art that you do. You are a musician, a composer. You've composed soundtracks for movies and documentaries. I've read that you learned to play instruments from cultures around the world, and my impression is that guitar is your primary instrument?
Yeah, it is. I do collect a lot of stringed instruments with frets. So that's my kind of thing, I suppose, and a bit of a magpie. I do like to go around and hear what different cultures, how they've evolved the guitar and, taken it and sort of transformed it into something else. And so that's sort of a big part of the work that I do, I suppose.
And you are also a sound artist, and you are also, well, of course, a podcast producer. I'm going to say children's book author, in the sense that the series that you've created, the Creek Kids, what you introduced me to, it is really it's so entertaining, and it is a living children's book. Is what it is and how it lands.
It's a radio play, I suppose, in the old sense of the word. Like it's an acted out audio book with live, not live, but actors and sort of music and soundscapes and that type of thing. So they're a lot of fun to make, and it's brought me a lot of joy in pulling these stories together.
Yeah, and so this has been a project for the past 4 years or so, 3-4 years.
Yeah, I think it's hard to remember exactly how it came about, but I do remember sort of lying in my kids' bedroom while they were trying to go to sleep, and they love audiobooks, but there used to be this tradition, maybe everywhere, but in Australia we used to have these audiobooks earlier on in the 80s through right back to maybe the 1930s that were sort of these incredibly rich radio plays that were sort of, full casts of actors, and they tell these stories, and they just sort of somehow get into your subconscious. I think that kind of way of telling stories and opening up kids' imaginations. And, I suppose nowadays there's a lot of narrated audiobooks, but they're quite a different kind of kettle of fish. They're sort of, effectively where you just have one narrator sort of reading out a book, but this is very different to that. This is sort of trying to take that older idea of radio plays and and bring my kids into that. So they're a big part of the script development. They sort of obviously act in the stories increasingly, and a lot of the kids in our neighbourhood have become involved as well. So they've, it's sort of grown organically, I suppose, in concentric circles. The longer we've gone on, there's been more and more kids from broader areas sort of becoming hooked on it, and so it's been really a lot of fun.
It is quite the production. I mean, I cannot imagine how much planning goes in beforehand. And there's the script, there's the music, there's the characters, and the changes in the plot, and all these really fun moments. And what stands out is all of the ecological lessons, the nature lessons, and the nature awareness exchanges with not only animal characters, but also concepts, biological concepts of all sorts of different things.
I think definitely when we embarked on it, I thought it might be like a half-day school holiday project that sort of evolved into this epic, 4-year undertaking, and it is a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun. But I think I guess the motivation for me is that kind of idea. I have that memory that, of certain stories that were really profound for me when I was a kid, that kind of stay with you and guide you, I think, subtly as you become an adult. And I'm kind of hopeful that these stories are kind of really about trying to, meet kids where they're at, because they're, often experiencing the natural world locally in their local place. And for me, that's our local creek behind where we live. And so I've spent a lot of time down there with my kids, and what I loved about it was just seeing how, being with them and watching them interact with everything around them. It's that sort of, there's no kind of defined boundary between the imaginative world and the real, tangible material world, I suppose. They're dancing between each other, and the more as an adult, you kind of forget that, but the more I kind of sat with them and participated in that, it's a really nice experience to kind of see how that wonder is there. And so the stories are really trying to sort of help, I guess, kids to connect more to that kind of their natural world, and hopefully anchor them as they grow older, and sort of give them a bit of sort of, a sense of memory of a place, and how they sort of interact with that as well.
The conversations between the children, the expressions that they use, it's just so it's so real, so everyday. They're so funny. Some of the things that I hear them say.
Yeah, it is. That's right, and it's great. I mean, they've gotten better at it as they go on, I think. But I think trying to work with them has been a lot of fun, because we sort of sit in the studio, and I will sort of tell them the words rather than let them read a script, because I think, once they start reading a script, it becomes very sort of stilted and a bit stiff. But when they kind of are a little bit allowed to inhabit the character and just sort of do line by line, they have a lot of fun. And I think as we've gone through, they've gotten a little bit more professional in their acting ability, but it is a lot of it does feel very natural. And I think the other thing that I really like about it is that I've been recording these sort of soundscapes down in the locations of where we've been doing the scenes of all of the stories, and so this idea of deep, encouraging them to listen more to their landscape as well. So there's sort of certain sounds that match, the time of day, the season, and all of that as well. And there's, one example is there's a sound of a microbat, a little bat species that we have along our creek. And now, like, I was in a tent once with the kids camping somewhere else, and they heard that sound of the microbat, and they knew what it was from these stories, which I thought was great, because it's sort of, it's that subtle thing of environmental education where I think you can kind of sneak in education without them knowing that they're being taught something, which is, a good way to do it, I think. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and I'm hopeful that as they grow older, they'll have that kind of, memory of these stories, and it'll kind of keep them connected.
Well, we gotta go and leave our nest now. Follow me along my trail. We don't wanna get caught in this one, 'cause the rain is gonna come down, down, down. Down, down, down. Down, down, down. Down, down, down. Everybody with a body, listen up now. We're giving you the ants warning. This isn't the time to argue or hope for have come, 'cause it's gonna get real wet. Wet, wet, wet. Wet, wet, wet. Wet, wet, wet. Wet, wet, wet. Big rain is coming. Big rain is coming.
Wow, it's amazing.
Okay, so you've answered one of the things that I was wondering about was how you work with the kids, and it's because they sound so natural, the exchange, and it sounds spontaneous as the story flows and plays out. And I was wondering if do you do a dress rehearsal with all the music and all the sounds so they hear the tension and the way everything's going to flow, or do you do all that after the fact?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm a bit secretive about the whole story to them. They're always wanting to know, but they're not allowed to know when we go into the studio what the whole story is. So there's they know their lines, they get told their lines, but I think the surprise at the end is hearing the whole thing come together. But having said that, there'll be times where I'll kind of go through certain parts of the script with them, and they'll throw in their own suggestions, like, no, let's do it like this, or this happens, and I'll try to weave those ideas in because they do send it off in a different direction, and it's quite fun for them, I think, to see how they've influenced things. But generally, it's sort of, with a bit of a mixture. Like I often go out with them and record them in their natural setting of playing down by the creek. So some of those sounds do come into it as well. But generally speaking, we're in the studio and recording sort of, individually, one by one, line by line, that sort of thing, and then piecing it all together.
That is great. And so the adult actors, are they aware of the entire storyline or not?
No,
yet?
the same deal for them. But it is a lot, that's even more fun, I think, because for them, it's such a weird experience to inhabit that kind of world and be silly. And a lot of them, none of them are actors, so they're all just sort of coming up with these voices and surprising themselves, I think, that they're sort of... And I've got so many, I have a lot of fun editing it because I can hear all their attempts and they're breaking down in laughter of all the ways that they just sound ridiculous, and then until they land it, and then they're quite happy with it. But I think it is a lot of fun to see adults kind of go into that world too, and increasingly as we started, I did a lot of the voices, but then I kind of run out of how many voices I could do, so we started bringing in more and more other adults who have brought a lot to it.
Goodness. And has the production time changed or, gotten less, or has it been the same? Because there are so many layers to these episodes. It's just amazing. I mean, how long does it take on average to act it all out and get all the tape that you need to get?
Yeah, it is a lot. I think there's, usually the whole process for each story is probably like a 6-month process of, writing the script, recording all the actors, doing all the background soundscapes, all the sound effects, then the music itself, like, we've done a lot of sort of interspersed, original music with the characters singing some of the songs and things. So that's always a lot of fun in and of itself. And that's, so all up probably about 6 months, and I wouldn't know how many hours within that 6 months, but it feels like a lot. But, a lot of what I'm trying to do outside of my normal working hours, I suppose, because none of this is a paid thing. It's really just for the love of it.
It's amazing. Okay, so we have the Creek Kids. There are The Mystery of the Flood. There's four.
There's four. Yeah. It's a little bit confusing the way that I've structured. There's 4 books, and I suppose The Mystery of the Flood, the one you mentioned, actually we had a flood here and we evacuated in our house. So that was part of that story, was actually helping them make sense of that scary time and introducing kind of concepts of these big seasonal patterns that we have here in Australia of La Nina and El Nino cycles of lots of rain and not hardly any rain. So there's that kind of subtle way of introducing that into the story, and then there's other stories where we go back in time, because we live in an area that was completely decimated by the gold rush, and it's sort of really important, I think, that they hear that story about all the complexities of that time and how that shaped the landscape they live in, and also that sort of introducing that idea that they're now custodians, but they're not kind of bystanders. They can actually participate in regenerating the landscapes around us as well. And so there's a lot of that in the stories about, seeing adults and doing repair work and regenerating the creek lines and other things. So that kind of subtle messaging is in there as well.
Yes, the heritage interpretation is also something that I love, and that definitely it's in the stories, and the heritage interpretation also comes through nicely, loud and clear through your Campbell's Creek sound trails, where you have 16 different points of interest on a creek, and this same creek that is featured in the stories or in the episodes as well.
Yeah, that's right. So the sound trail is, sound trails are done all around the world and they have been for a long time, but this one is, using a lot of the modern technologies where your phone uses the GPS on your phone, and as you walk through the track along the creek, it takes about an hour, but it'll trigger, interviews and soundscapes and different kind of sound samples along the creek that are sort of attached to that particular spot. So it was a really nice project because it took, I don't know how long, probably 2 years to kind of compile all of the interviews, and I spent a lot of time kind of down at one particular spot at the creek with my microphones just recording. We'd just sit there often for like, an hour or so, at different times of the day, at different seasons, and I was really trying to capture how a place can change in its sort of sonic cycles, I guess, or the sounds that change in one particular place. Because as most of us, walk through these landscapes and don't pay too much attention to what we're listening to, and particularly if we're not sort of First Nations. And I think that idea that we're kind of, you can tune in to a landscape and really learn about what sort of is happening at that particular time and what, how that changes through time is really interesting as well. So it was a really amazing chance to connect in at different layers to a place that I live next to and sort of feel like my own relationship deepened through the project as well. But overall, there's stories that talk about the history of the creek. There's all these different angles from the ecology of it, whether it's sort of talking about cicadas or microbats or possums and mammals that we have along the creek. There's all these different stories that people that live locally have about this place, and I kind of wanted to weave in all the ways and sort of, I guess, interactions that people have with this waterway, which is really an urban waterway. There's nothing too special about it in the sense of uniqueness. I think a lot of towns, a lot of communities have these waterways, but they don't pay much attention to them. They just sort of drive over them or, walk around them or throw their rubbish into them, that sort of thing. So I think this idea of actually, most of us live near a waterway, and they're often incredible little ecosystems in and of themselves and have the potential to be. So that's the kind of purpose of the sound trail, is trying to bring more people into that experience and understand the layers of this place and how to kind of go a bit deeper. What does a place sound like? What you're about to hear is a time-lapse series of field recordings taken from this location across different times of the day and night, and across different seasons throughout the year. Listen in to how the sounds of this place can change through time.
So was this an interpretive project with the local park system? Is this something that you initiated on your own, or
Yeah, it was just I guess the council were building a new trail through the bush, and so I just sort of approached them and said, hey, as part of this, big project that you're doing, how about a sound trail? And they were excited about that. So they provided a little bit of funding towards that idea and helped sort of me, spend a bit of time on that over that period of time. And then we had the flood, which wiped out the other parts of the trail. So it got, massively delayed by 2 or 3 years actually. So that's just the nature of these things. But yeah, that was the partnership. And then I sort of, engaged a few First Nations people as well of the local area to sort of talk about it from their perspective and welcome people to the country and that type of thing too. Which is actually a really tricky element, I think, as a white person and trying to tell stories of a place that aren't First Nation stories, and then that role as a producer where you are curating content and stories, and I think that's quite a tricky space when you're kind of working with First Nations, and obviously there's that kind of power in being a producer. So I was very aware and cautious of how that kind of happened and checked in with them quite a lot.
Yeah, well, it's a nice walk through that creek.
Yeah, that's good.
And I have, of course, nowhere near it, but it's a nice
Yeah,
walk.
well, that's nice. Yeah, that's great. It's a good bit of escapism if you need to get out somewhere without being able to get out somewhere.
Yeah, and the audio segments, the video segments are very succinct. They're short, they're engaging. Really like the video with the young boy was explaining the red-eye cicadas.
Oh yeah, well that's my son actually. He did
is
that.
it?
Yeah, we had a day off school once and we went down there to record something else, and then he just started riffing on about the cicadas. It was great because I just happened to catch it, and I'm like, when is he going to stop? Because the actual whole thing went for about half an hour, and I had to keep cutting it down because he just was so intensely excited about this thing that he'd learnt about the cicada cycle. And now it's really nice because he's like 5 years older, I think, from when we recorded that. So it's really quite cute to listen back to him then. But yeah, it's, I've just really enjoyed that project. It's just, I think seeing when you're in this space of being a producer and a sound recorder and you've got a microphone, as you'd probably know, there's that you see people kind of come to life when they're allowed to talk about the things that they're into. And I think for me, being down at the creek with people that have obviously spent, decades of their life in this place and full of love for this place, and just sort of seeing that come through, it's really heartwarming and sort of really great to be able to sort of capture that and then share it with others and let that kind of infect others as well.
For the show The Creek Kids, are you the primary scriptwriter, or do you work with a team of others?
Yeah. I mean, apart from that thing I mentioned of just, every now and then giving the kids a sense of where it's going and they chime in with their ideas. I think often some of the ideas actually originate from them. Like there's, they wanted to do a story where they shrunk, and that's the latest one. So we did do, off the back of that, we kind of then shrunk and went into the kind of insect world and all of that thing. But primarily, yeah, I do the script writing, which my wife is, often complaining about my grammar because she listens to the final version, is like, pulling me up on some of the things that I probably could have said a bit more correctly. But yeah, it's organic.
Exactly, it's organic. What other storylines can you reveal? Any upcoming series that you have coming up?
Well, I'm at a funny point now with my own kids and their friends, because they're almost at the age where it's not cool enough to do this anymore. But I did ask the eldest one about that in this latest episode, and he said, no way, I'm going to be doing this the rest of my life. So hopefully he lives up to that. But yeah, we've just finished the latest book, which is The Mystery of the Lerp, which is kind of a little bit about, foxes and cats in their impact in Australia. And that's the story where the kids shrink and, go into this other world. But so I need a rest until we embark on the next one. But yeah, I'm sure we'll come up with something soon.
I was wondering, do you have younger nieces, nephews, neighbor kids who might want to go for the next
We
production?
do, yeah. We've got a neighbour who's 3, and have already expressed, very very keen to be involved, and that's what happens. The kids from my own kids' school and around the neighbourhood, there's a growing audience. There's quite a lot of kids that sort of are listening into these stories and are really excited about when they're next coming out now, and they're all wanting to be involved in some way or another. So it's sort of holding back the horses, but I think it's it's nice because it is a real community project as well. And there are kids from, very far away in other countries and things that listen to the stories now as well. But I think the original idea was that this would be very place-based, and the kids from the local community could connect in with it and know the places we're talking about as well, as much as possible. So, but now I do think that it has that potential to, be stories that kids can engage with no matter where they live, and hopefully gets them curious about their own waterways, their own landscapes, and going exploring.
Yes. And so that was one of my questions. You had mentioned that you wanted these stories to spread and go beyond the local area. What do you hope people will do with the stories? Are you hoping that people will start to create their own audio stories? Do you have plans to help them do that, or how do you want to inspire other people?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, because I think I'd love that idea of this growing where people do from other places feel inspired to make something similar, with giving them a cautionary note that it takes a lot of work, but I think, the idea of growing the audience is probably really just about trying to, it is something that we think has impact. It's definitely having impact where we live, and we'd love that to continue to grow its impact in terms of connecting with kids where they're at, and, engaging them more in the environment and nature, and doing so in a way that introduces that kind of those subtle ethics at the same time. Like, there's, I think, a really important role for stories in helping us think about where we've come from and where we're going. And I think particularly with some of the big challenges like climate change and other things, kids, having the tools to kind of think about how they are a part of the systems that they're in and how they can change them in a positive way. All of those sort of ethics can be really powerfully brought in through storytelling. So that's the sort of the main hope of growing the audience, is that kind of gets them thinking about these things in a slightly different way. But, very, very keen for people with similar skills to kind of embark on a similar project in another place. That'd be fantastic. Because there's creeks all around the world, and there's kids all around the world.
There are. It's a great way to learn about watersheds and just an area in general.
That's right. Funnily enough, one of the other reasons I started the project is that before our floods that happened here, hardly anyone that I spoke to knew where our creek had come from, where it was going, and where, how it actually ran through our town, went up the back of the town and up the mountain, connected with another creek and branched off, and then downstream sort of flowed through all these other rivers until it reached the ocean. And I just thought that's pretty staggering that, all these people that live next to it and never sort of asked these questions, and it really just sort of pointed to the disconnection that we have about our creeks and waterways. And I think they're such a critical part of why these towns chose to be where they are in the first place. Often, like, the histories of these towns are often built around water. So I think that sort of part of the reason for the story is like, hey, here's this thing, and let's pay more attention to it.
Yeah, I don't know about where you are, but out here, a lot of the rivers and places like that, they're all concrete lined. And so it doesn't look like a river. You don't think of it as a river. And I think that, for out here, that compounds the problem, or the not knowing of what a watershed is and what goes on, and
Yeah, well, you're right, and there's similarly houses being built on floodplains because we sort of ignore the fact that rivers and creeks change in the amount of water they have. And I think we've got a similar thing here, like a section of our creek is a concrete drain, but luckily we're in the process of cracking that all up and actually reintroducing sort of swales and, ponds and meandering sort of, so that it is possible to kind of, change that story, I suppose. But that's definitely the story that a lot of us live with, is this sort of engineered solution to water that isn't really fit for the future we're moving into.
You mentioned that you would love to see other people create their own stories, their own podcasts, short serials with sound and live acting in this type of a format. Have you ever considered posing a challenge to families or podcast producers around an annual event like Earth Day or World Environment Day or, Pollinator Week or something like that, and to see, give everybody maybe 6 months lead time?
Yeah, no, I haven't. I think it's a great idea. Yeah, I think that's a really nice idea. I might give that more thought. I mean, there's obviously similar things happen for documentary making, and we have a Castlemaine Documentary Festival that does a similar thing, where it puts out a kind of, call to action 6 months ahead of the festival, and then it screens them. So I think that's a nice idea. And I think back to your earlier point about, this being a global thing, I like that idea, that maybe there's people out there that sort of hear this and get inspired and want to do something similar, and then we end up having a network of all these stories that, could be Creek Kids Global or whatever it might be. But it's, I think that's fantastic. So if any of your listeners are keen, I'm very happy to chat. That'd be great to shape up.
Okay, I'll make sure that's in the show notes. Yeah, I think that would be an really exciting idea. When I first started the podcast in that first year, the Wild and Scenic Film Festival came around, the touring version, and I brought the podcast there just as an exhibitor vendor thing during the happy hour section and all that, because it kind of aligned with the stories. It's the first time I had been to that particular event and was blown away about what you can do in just 2-3 minutes time.
Yeah.
And the messages you send, the stories you can tell, the emotions that you can evoke, and the music was always magic. And watching your clips on your website, it's always struck me about trailers and about something like that Wild and Scenic Film Festival and the clips that you have on your site. The music to me anyway, makes it feel like all of that was created for just you, for just an audience of one. And the music just envelops everything, and it just becomes a safe place to watch the story play out. And I was just always wondered how much work between the music composer and yourself and the other people involved in the film to make that happen. And how do you know when you've done that? Because that also comes through in the podcast episodes of the Creek Kids.
Yeah, that's a nice reflection, nice way to put it. I think definitely I've noticed often in making music for film, the director, will provide me with an early edit. And it is an interesting process where, before the music's on there, nothing really hangs together, and the music really acts as that glue that kind of binds everything. But it also really elevates just some, whatever sort of emotion's being conveyed. The music really just plays that incredible role sort of to help lift that up into another sphere. And the process itself of making music for film, it's incredibly tedious at times. Like, we're often going through so many iterations of the same piece of music, and then you find the directors change the edit and you need to start again or move things around. And so it can be, you might do sort of 40 or 50 takes of the same song, at which point you're completely over it and fed up. and then magically, as it starts to come together again, it really, you just feel, so incredibly, I guess, moved and inspired again. So it's this interesting process. And art making. I did do a film once about climate grief, and that was a really interesting time because there were the big bushfires happening here in Australia, and that sort of outside the studio window was sort of an orange sky and really foreboding thing that was happening around me. And then the content of the film was very much this heavy film about the people around the world in different cultures experiencing this sort of, unfolding loss. So it was incredibly, incredible time for me just to make music and kind of process my own grief around some of these things that were happening. And I just remember sort of being in there with the music and feeling, getting really teary and really I guess having my own experience, my own private experience, but then somehow this music's ended up on a film that other people then see in a different context. And I think, I think hopefully when you're making music, that kind of, is transferred, that you're, as a composer, transferring your own experience and emotions through to another person. And you never know who that person is, but it's always nice when it connects.
Looking at all the different examples of your work and the Creek Kids and the original music that you've written for that series, that's, what do I want to say it? That is really creative energy, really good energy.
Good energy. Well,
and the songs are so fun on the podcast series, and then when you look at your other work, samples of your other work, it's just mind-boggling to me.
Thank you. And I think that was it's such a nice thing. I had done so many heavy projects like the one I just mentioned, and to kind of shift gears and move into making stuff for kids where it is so silly at times and fun and full of joy, and it's just been such a nice kind of healing experience, I suppose, to kind of move out of all the problems the adult world brings and sort of move back into that world of wonder and joy and just being a bit less, taking yourself less seriously. I think it's been a lot of fun, and adults equally seem to be really enjoying it for that reason too. I think there's a lot of adults that seem to love listening to it with their kids and kind of inhabiting that world as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there. That could be that's another idea. A new whole series just for adults.
There you go. Yeah. Teaching us to not to take ourselves too seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, you do beautiful work. The Kids Podcast is so much fun. I so admire the amount of work that you've put into it. Where can people learn more about you, your work, and the Creek Kids?
Well, I suppose I have, a website mostly about the music, but that's probably the best spot. It's the robthelaw.com.au. So that's probably the best point. And I think you can contact me through that if you have ideas yourself and, want to take some of your suggestions further. That sounds fun.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, and if you do, you're welcome to come back on and we'll do a campaign to get more people involved.
Great. Would love to.
Okay, well, thank you, Rob.
Thanks, Tania, so much. It's been great.
To learn more about Rob and the Creek Kids and his work as a composer and musician, be sure to visit the show notes for this episode. Here you will find links to the podcast and to the film projects that Rob has been a part of. Thank you for joining us today. See you next time.